Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel called zuzanareacts, where I learn all things para with your help, and I just share my Slovak Central European point of view. And in today's video we are continuing with a conversation on what is consciousness, part 3 with Sadhguru and Harvard scientists. And before we get into the video,
please like this video and click on the subscribe button and turn on the notification. Thank you so much for your support.
Okay, I'm just very curious to continue. What's next?
We do have our 5 senses, each one of which relies on a ingenious little bit of tissue that converts physical energy into neural impulses. And we might have more than 5 senses, depending on how you count. But what we don't have, and this is also relevant to whether consciousness is a miracle, is extrasensory perception, ESP, that is access to states of the world not mediated through some physical transmission of signals. ESP often held to comprise telekinesis, the ability to move objects or cause physical changes through brain power; clairvoyance, the ability to sense the state of the world without any causal chain of transmission of information; precognition, the ability to foresee the future; and telepathy, the ability to sense other people's thoughts. And there is a lively tradition going back millennia of believing that ESP exists. And we know it doesn't exist. I mean, if we know anything, that every attempt to demonstrate one of the varieties of extrasensory perception has been shown to be overinterpretation of coincidences interpreted post hoc. You remember the hits, you bury all of the misses and false alarms. Sometimes actual fraud and flim-flam, as in the self-designated clairvoyants who turn out just to use cheap stage magic. They often fool the physicists because physicists are as foolable by stage magic as anyone else. The ones they don't fool are fellow magicians who can easily expose the tricks. The fact that there is no ESP, one more bit of evidence is we have never, all it would take is a tiny bit of statistical precognition. You don't even need to foresee events exactly, but just beyond the base rate probabilities, and you could get arbitrarily rich in the futures market. You could short or long Bitcoin or Tesla stocks, and if you could really see if someone somewhere out there could really see the future, they'd be the richest person on earth, because it would not take very much predictive power to outsmart the rest of the market. No such person exists. More evidence that consciousness is not a miracle, that the senses really are the only way in which we can derive information about empirical reality. If someone were to show that ESP existed, I would have to revise a lot of my beliefs about the nature of consciousness and mental activity.
We're in no way referring to such things like ESP or magical ways of knowing things, no. I'm talking about the fundamental existence of who we are. Do we exist? I think in most human beings' experience, unless they're lost in their logic, if you simply sit here, you know you exist. So, this knowing that I exist is not a derivative of neuronal electrical activity in the brain alone. Even beyond that we exist, because there are states where all this can come down to almost nothing, and still you exist, actually you exist much more. I'm hearing a lot of experiments going on with hallucinogenics and mushrooms and stuff in the universities, not by the students, by the professors. So they are saying that when they have these spectacular experiences, the brain activity has actually come down, not gone up, as everybody would have believed. So there are states. See, one important thing is we should not conclude, especially science should never conclude what we do not know cannot exist. That will not be a good thing to do.
I like that. That is very valid, very valid.
Yes, but nor should we make up stuff for which we have no reason to believe it exists.
Yeah, this is to me just the argument of you see, like when I mentioned before, and the other part where, he talks about the kind of the superiority of science, which hasn't been around for much, and and he talks about humility and all the kind of things, and in a way, to me, I'm not so sure he's coming to trying to come across arrogant, but I'm almost viewing this as arrogant, like to making things up. I mean, there has been tradition, there has been like more advanced civilizations ahead of us, and for the scientists to have a nerve to discredit like the ancient knowledge is kind of beyond me. But I think what's becoming more and more apparent through that obviously Sadhguru is having his own point of view from a spiritual angle, and this guy is having just the pure scientific angle that has zero to do with spirituality pretty much. And I think he's leading a very solid discussion. But it's kind of like, I feel like Sadhguru understands the science and the spirituality behind it, whereas the guys only understand science. And to me, in a way, it's a bit sad. I mean, this is not in a way any judgment of any of you guys that don't believe in anything out there, but it is just like, try to look at, just think about, okay, and I think this is the tricky part as well, right? Like, how do you think about, for example, how do you judge Zuzana without really being Zuzana, without really understanding her belief systems and, beliefs that in her head come into conflict? And because we are very complex animals, if you like. So it's a tricky one also for him to adopt, like, he would now need to think, like, how would I think if I had that belief system? And I think it's a very hard for us to, this is why judging is not great, because you just really cannot. I think it's virtually personally impossible, but yeah, let's continue.
Thank you. That was great conversation. But I think there are millions of people around the world, even who experience the states of the deeper states of meditation. It's not just one or two from different schools they've experienced, which are not explainable by current ways of examining them, because we don't have the tools for it. So we're not able to explain the deeper states of meditation and the states they live in. So that is not made up, right? So how do we experience that is an unknown thing. So we have, that's all you're saying, is be open and examine that in a way that can we understand that or not.
Well, we may not understand it in the sense that it involves such unfathomably intricate patterns of brain activity, leading one brain pattern leading to another brain pattern in ways that we may not understand. I don't know if we don't understand it in the sense that it must involve some new form of energy or some kind of contradiction of the idea that it's all brain activity. But brain activity can be really, really complex, and there's an awful lot we don't understand, including the effects of meditation. Now, what I'm very skeptical of is that any state of meditation, for example, can result in clairvoyance or telekinesis or telepathy or precognition. And I assume you're not, I'm sure you're not, I assume you're not stating that meditation can accomplish that.
No, not at all. So, for example, Matthew Rickard's brain, I think Stephen Lawrence is here, he examined his brain, and they've looked at their brain activity, functional MRI, etc. And they showed a relaxed, alert state where everything is fired up. And this man this is like a trait for him. It's not like a state examination. And they could see that that relaxed alertness leads to fired up brain completely, but still relaxed. So that is not the usual pattern that happens in a normal person who is not meditating, right? So, for example, so I'm not proposing that they're clairvoyant. That is very different. I'm just saying that these are rare, and these kind of brains, it seems like they're just completely fired up, but still very, very relaxed. So that is, I think that's a great state to be in.
No, that's interesting. I had an event with him in Paris in which we talked about the historical processes that lead to peace. And indeed, there may be aspects of brain function that we don't understand that could be illuminated by meditation, understood as one complex pattern of brain activity leading to another complex pattern of brain activity, all within the realm of the natural.
See, the things that we're talking about, clairvoyance, telepathy, these are childish tricks. That's not what we are referring to. The English word meditation doesn't define anything. This is a problem. Because when it comes to subjectivity, English language is very poor. When it comes to objective world, English language is phenomenally effective. Having said that, if someone closes their eyes and sits, generally people say, oh, he or she is meditating. You can close your eyes and do japa, tapa, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, shunya, samyama. Well, these are all distinct states which are taught and transmitted in a systematic way, not just some, some mumbo-jumbo way that I try to redefine the word miracle, but you're sticking to the religious form of miracle. I'm not going there. Let's leave that word. Let's say magical experiences. because magic can still be explained, but it's still magical in our experience. Leaving that aside, we can clearly transmit these aspects distinctly from one to the other. If they come to a dharana initiation, we will do only dharana. If they come to dhyana, we'll do only dhyana. If they come to samyama, we do only samyama. Distinctly different states that a human being can experience. Is all this about electrical activity? Someday, I think, the scientists must invest enough time to study these things, not with the attitude of proving or disproving it, but just by looking at it. Just simply looking at it without making conclusions, because conclusions are coming from what present things that we know, what data that we have. The very fundamental of science is that whatever we know right now is not everything. That is the fundamental of science we are seeking. Because seeking comes from the most fundamental realization that we do not know. That's why we are seeking. Seeking is genuine only if we see, I do not know. If I'm seeking this or that, I already know it is there, I'm looking for confirmation, that's not seeking, we're just making it up. So essentially, it is very important if these two disciplines have to meet. It's because these two disciplines meeting is very important for human well-being. Just with thinking that improving the economies of the world, which is wonderful, changing the social structures of the world, which is fantastic, providing medical care, this, that, everything is fantastic, but still, human beings will still not attain to any sense of fulfillment or fullness of experience of life unless they turn inward. This turning inward is not about watching the electrical processes in my brain. It is about looking at something far more fundamental within myself. If we conclude that there is nothing more fundamental apart from electricity, well, then a light bulb lights up, that's enlightenment. We should not look at it that way.
I feel like he's fired up and pissed off.
Because we must understand, this whole thing is coming from… I'm sorry if I'm making some generalization, it is a generalization, but I'm saying this contextually. See, this whole… the European thing about enlightenment or a period of enlightenment has come because they were under the tyranny of dogmatic belief systems. When they broke away, they felt liberated. But such a thing never existed in the East. We never faced such things. There was no anything dogmatic ruling us. Thinking and, thinking to whatever extent we can was always free for us. So we never thought thinking free is enlightenment. For us, enlightenment is a much more profound process. So, breaking away from dogma and thinking freely, it's a basic human right. I don't call that enlightenment. But because of that background, your resistance for the word miracle is essentially coming from the religious, stuff that has happened, people claiming all kinds of miracles happening from here, there, God is talking to me and all this stuff. We are not talking about that, we are not talking about clairvoyance, we are not talking about telepathy, please use the telephone. Don't compete with the telephone company, all right? So, but is there something more profound to human existence than physiological and psychological drama? In my experience, 100% there is.
Good one, I like it. I feel like he was pretty educated.
Thank you. So you've written a lot of books and we wanted to ask additional questions, so we'll move on from this. So one of the books that you wrote was Enlightenment Now, and that book was, Bill Gates called it his book of the century, and it's basically you make a case for reason, science, humanism, and logic. And progress. Thank you for correcting me. So what you have said is over the centuries, people have become better, they live better, their income has gotten better, and they're happier and all of that. And also you're saying sometimes blips happen during the lifetime. Like for my lifetime, if I look at this, over the centuries, yes, things have improved, a lot of good things have happened. But still, when I'm living, for me, what is real is the current uncertainty that exists or the wars and etc. that is happening. So just knowing that we have progressed is enough. When there is uncertainty like that, what do we do? Just knowing, is that enough to correct ourselves, course correction?
Yes, so Enlightenment Now won me a lot of unearned friends among Buddhists, but it isn't about that kind of enlightenment. It really is about the ideals that came out of the Enlightenment of the 18th century. I tried to document that progress was not a matter of optimism, not a matter of seeing the bright side, of seeing the glass as half full, but it was an empirical hypothesis that could be tested. That is, if we agree on what is good, and I think most people would agree that it's better to be alive than dead, better to be well-fed than hungry, better to be well than sick, better to be affluent than poor, better to be educated than illiterate and ignorant, better to be happy than unhappy, and so on. All of these things can be measured, and if they've increased over time, that would be progress. And I have 75 graphs, and most of them have increased over time. Now, never in a straight line, never even monotonically, which is to say always increasing and never decreasing. All of them have dips along the way. Now, having been reminded of the fact that progress is a real empirical phenomenon, it's natural to think, and people in the 19th century did think, that there is a force in the universe that somehow lifts us ever upward. Now, this would be a miracle, and as you can probably tell from my remarks so far tonight, I don't believe in miracles. And this progress wasn't a miracle. The reason that there are fewer famines is that people like Sadhguru advocated conserving soil and vigorous hybrids and synthetic fertilizer and crop rotation. The reason that lifespans more than doubled is because of sanitation and antibiotics and blood transfusion. And for every one of the dimensions of progress, there was a cause. If we understand those causes correctly, and it's not easy to do it because lots of things happen at once, so it's not so easy to disentangle them and figure out what the primary cause was. But the benefit of understanding progress is that we can have more of it. That is, not by relying on any miracle, but by doing the things that worked in the past and that are likely to work in the future. Conversely, it means that if those causes of progress are neutralized, we could get stasis or regression. And indeed, there are periods in which various events happen that are regressions, not progress. The war in Ukraine is a prime example. And I would say that that is exactly what what would happen if one of the causes of the increase in peace over the last 75 years, namely the replacement of a valorization of national glory and greatness by the well-being of men, women, and children. It is that change in ideas that helped drive the rate of war down. But if you have a leader that is drunk with the opposite ideology, who believes that national glory, spheres of influence, national greatness, civilizational grandeur is the ultimate value, and if people die, then so much the worse, then you won't have increased progress toward peace. You might have backtracking toward war, and that's what we are seeing in Ukraine, for example. Likewise, in the extension of the human lifespan, again, not a miracle. It happens because we had vaccines and antibiotics and sanitation. If the germs evolve faster than we can develop vaccines and antivirals and antibiotics, then lifespan can go down, as it did during the pandemic. Fortunately, reason and science, together with humanism, I argue, are the three drivers of the progress we've observed, pushed back, and the pandemic is now under greater control, and the increase in longevity appears to have resumed.
There's also a comment that mental health pandemic is on the rise.
Pardon me?
The mental health pandemic is on the rise right now. So the mental health.
Well, mental health.
Yeah.
Well, in some countries, in some demographics, yes. So in American teenagers and young adults, there has been an increase in anxiety and depression. This more so for young women than young men, more so for left-wing young women than right-wing young women. So this is a phenomenon that occurs with some sectors, and more so in the United States than in other countries. Now, we don't understand why, but again, because the progress that we have seen, including increase in happiness and a decrease in suicide worldwide, but it doesn't happen everywhere all the time. That would be a miracle, and it's not a miracle. And if there are causes of unhappiness and anxiety that are more concentrated in some countries, some demographics, some ages, some periods, we should work very hard to find out what they are so that we could undo them.
Well, there's no question the kind of progress we have made in the last 100 years in terms of comforts, conveniences that we have achieved through progress of science and technology. Mm-hmm. We are the most comfortable generation ever in the history of humanity. Nobody had it this good, especially for women and children. It's never been this good ever in the history of humanity. There's simply no question about that. But one important thing that's happened is, in previous generations, basic survival was such a challenge. Because basic survival was such a challenge, it kept everybody focused. There was not much struggle in the mind, because daily getting my bread, when it's a struggle, you don't have much to drive yourself nuts, all right? You don't have enough time to drive yourself crazy. But as the survival issue is settled in the human being, you will see more and more struggles on the psychological level, because the physical struggles are gone. Now the struggle moves into the software department from hardware. So this struggle we may see as mental illnesses and so many kinds of sufferings that people are going through, which unfortunately leads to a very high rate of suicide today in the world, almost in many countries, but unfortunately in most affluent countries it is at the highest. So our economic development and social liberties, everything is fine, but still if we don't address how a human being experiences oneself, how to manage human experience, we are engineering the whole world the way we want it. Fantastic, no question. What is one person's miracle is another man's engineering. I'm fundamentally from the engineering background. So, what is an airplane is a miracle for one person, is a engineering for another person. So, the whole thing goes the same way with us also, because this is the most sophisticated machine on the planet. Have we engineered it well? Have we made it the way we want it? Because a well-engineered something means, when we say this building is well-engineered, we are saying it works well for the purpose for which we are here. When we say my car is well-engineered, we are saying it works the way I want. But is your mind, is your body working the way you want? If it did, would you have any suffering? Would you have any, struggles within you? Obviously, it's not working the way you want. Your own intelligence is turning against you and torturing individual people. People don't need any help from outside. Normally, people come to me, Sadhguru, my mother-in-law, I can't take it anymore, my husband like this, my wife is like that, my boss is like this. I say, you do one thing, you come here. No mother-in-law, no husband, no wife, no boss, just you. You come. I will give you a nice place to stay and good food to eat. You don't have to do anything. Just stay in the room, just be joyful, that's all. I just make some random checks on you. If you're miserable, we'll stop feeding you, because I don't believe in feeding misery.
Wow, love it.
So, you leave them in one place for 24 hours, they will be twisting themselves in so many ways. So you don't need any outside help. When there is outside help, you think it's because of this person I'm miserable, because that person I'm miserable. No, the problem is you do not know how to handle your own faculties, your own memory, your own imagination. What is it that people are suffering? What happened 10 years ago, they're still suffering. What may happen day after tomorrow, they're already suffering. Essentially, you're not suffering life, you're suffering two most important faculties which are distinct and a great privilege for the human being, which no other creature has, a very vivid sense of memory and a fantastic sense of imagination. These are the two things we are suffering. Without this, we wouldn't even be human, we would be like any other creature. So, when you find your own mind troubles you and makes you suffer, you can call it anger, you can call it stress, you can call it anxiety or more serious ones. Essentially, it is your intelligence turning against you. This means you do not know how to hold it, you do not know how to hold yourself. This great privilege of being human, when I say the great privilege, at least according to evolutionary sciences, you are supposed to be the peak of evolution. That means you're on top of the world. But are you feeling like you're top of the world? Most people are not, they're dragging their feet and going around with great suffering within themselves. This suffering is not because of life around you. This suffering is your inability to handle yourself. So one important aspect of our education process should be, we are always thinking about how to conquer everything around us. It's important we also bring this into our life, our society, that how to manage this in such a way that it never turns against me. This is very important. If we don't learn this, if we do not pay attention to this, how not to turn my own memory, my own imagination, my own intelligence against myself, if this awareness does not arise within us, then we may have everything and we will suffer. People can live in a palace and they're living miserably. This is happening all over the place. So, in previous generations, a lot of people like to see, in previous generations, people were very peaceful, very happy. It's not true, believe me. It's not true. It is just that past, because of the distance, in southern Indian languages, there is a saying, a faraway hill looks smooth and wonderful. With past, there is a distance. Because there's a distance, everything about it is wonderful, But if it's here, then there is a struggle, because you have to tread through the whole thing. This process of suffering our own memory, our own imagination, our own intelligence is essentially because the necessary awareness as to how these function, what can we do about it, is not subjective. Objectively, we may know how it functions, we may be reading it on the MRIs and EEGs and this and that, but individual human beings do not know how it works within me. What can I do about it? How should I hold my intelligence? In what context? So that it always works for me, never against me.
Very, very wise, and another way of putting the…
Okay, I'll pause here. What he was saying here was very interesting. You know, he said about the hill is further, and we have the saying, or in English language has the saying, the grass is greener on the other side. But very interesting, the discussion. I'll see what a guy has to say. I've made a couple of comments. Let's see.
Point is to quote Franklin Pierce Adams, the best explanation for the good old days is a bad memory. Now, I do want to update one point, is that globally, suicide rates have come down by a lot, by like 40% over the last 30 years for the period for which we have data. Not in the United States. The United States suicide rates have gone up since their low point in the late 1990s. Again, we don't completely understand why. I hope we will. But it's important to keep in mind that the United States, in many ways, has its own national pathologies that are not true of other affluent democracies and not true of the world. And in terms of suicide, in most countries, not all, rates of suicide have come down by a lot, including India.
Okay, so I will just pause here, and because it's very interesting, because obviously he's a scientist, and I'm going to say something, and I'm not saying I'm right, but this is just like my wild assumption, because I think this question was actually answered by Sadhguru, and he basically says we are really living in a very comfortable society. We never had it as good, you know. And he said women, children never had it that good, and we were not concerned with the survival. And once you're not concerned with the survival, and then I mentioned it, I think somewhere else, you know. In psychology, you have this Maslow hierarchy of needs. So if you have certain needs, you have to have certain needs fulfilled before you can self-actualize. And once you have food, you have shelter, you have family, you have work, and then you start thinking about the meaning of life and purpose and all that kind of stuff. And this would not be allowed to people that are just really not, I don't want to say allowed, perhaps not the right word, but like, you know, when you are in a constant survival mode, this is not what you're going to be experiencing. But like when you live like in the US, in a country that really never known war apart from Second World War, that they bombed Pearl Harbor, and their Civil War. I mean, but they've lived pretty, in a way, very, very safe, isolated and safe. So you are, once you're not concerned with that, you know, you start concerned, your mind is concerned with other things. So I felt like Sadhguru has explained that to him, and he's saying we don't know. And obviously, you know, this is just a wild guess, and maybe there are many other factors. You know, obviously I can't claim anything here, yeah. With that being said, yeah, I'm just looking at my notes as to what I've taken, because Sadhguru was talking about how to manage yourself, how to manage the experience. This is why in America you have psychology so strong, because there are a lot of people with those mental health issues. But there was one book on Psychology Direct, and I think I don't know, I think it was something around kindness. I'll try to look it up and find it for you. It's been a couple of years since I read that, but basically they said that the way they cured mental health illness was that the people that were you know, depressed or anxious, etc., they put them in the communities with people that with actual real needs, and they've taken the focus of you onto the other, because I feel like, in a way, but that's kind of what I perhaps believe in, that we come here to serve others, and through serving others we actually serve ourselves. So once the focus has been taken away from their problems, and they've seen people that were doing way worse, and they helped them, suddenly these problems started to dissipate. But this is still there. I'm just shocked, because I think it was like a PhD or someone, like also research booked. And now, you know, they just load people with their, in America they have their Xanaxes and all that kind of stuff, and they just are trying to cure symptoms instead of going to root cause, you know. Sometimes I feel even though going to therapy should be trying to sort out the root cause, and unless there are some kind of chemical reaction, you know, at the very start of the episode, they talked about like open brain surgery where you know, where you can feel things and this is where you can be conscious, la di da di da. But you know, if certain part of the brain is removed, you act differently. So this is a slightly different scenario. But it is certainly, yeah, I'm actually surprised that he was not biting on what Sadhguru was saying. So maybe there's way more to the story than, you know, I'm seeing or anticipating. But let's continue.
One of the good response.
About the suicide rate, those countries where there was economic distress and people were taking their lives out because it was simply not able to survive, in those countries it's come down. But where there is economic well-being for at least 2-3 generations, in those countries it's gone up. That's what we have noticed.
Yeah.
Well, not all, because India has gotten far more affluent in the last 30 years and the suicide rate has come down. But for the people who, I mean, GDP per capita in India, it's one of the economic success stories in the last 30 years. One of the factors that seems to drive for people who've looked at what has driven suicide rates downward, one of them is urbanization, that rates in many countries are much higher in rural areas, partly because you often get women who are in arranged or forced marriages who are ripped away from their family, their friend. They're living under the control of their mother-in-law in a town which they have no social contacts, and they will sometimes end their lives. When you have the freedom in a city to develop friends and social contacts, to choose your social circle, that leads to the social connections that make suicide much less likely.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about India, see, I'm very closely involved with the Indian society, its economy, how it works. India has made huge progress in the last couple of decades, no question about that. But that progress belongs to a small percentage of people. There are many Indias. You can at least identify 5 layers of India. So one layer of India is doing phenomenally well. Another layer of India is benefiting from the first layer. Third layer, little bit of trickle down. But down under, where nearly 55% is in agriculture, there it's bad. So most of the suicides which are happening in India today is unfortunately in the agricultural sector. So we are working on this. There is no immediate solution as such. It's not an overnight thing.
Okay, so I'll just stop it right here for the part 3, and I think what a fascinating discussion. I was interjecting during the video. I hope you don't mind. I just forget when I have to summarize at the very end. But what was fascinating for me was just the sentence before that Sadhguru mentioned there are 5 layers of India, and now I actually do want to know what he meant. Like he said, one is the layer is doing phenomenally well, second one is you know, benefiting from me. If you could please give me a context to this in the comments, that would be super helpful. And also do let me know what was your key takeout out of this part. What did you kind of really enjoy about this conversation? It's in my head, it still feels like it's so hard to have a conversation with someone that doesn't understand your belief system or where you're coming from, and then in their belief system it gets misconstrued and vice versa. So yeah, sometimes I felt like yeah, it's just a battle of science and spirituality, isn't it? And sometimes I feel like what Sadhguru was trying to point out was the fact that, you know, we live in dual universe as well. But I cannot wait to see what the discussion still brings in a part 4. But this will be it for today's video. If you did like it, please give a thumbs up, share, like, and subscribe to this channel. And I'll see you in the final part 4 very soon. Until then, please do take care. Sending much love. Bye-bye.